So now I am not quite as knowledgeable as Sandra. She has spent years and years and years
books behind her.
doing this. A lot of my experience has just been talking with friends. So just a little bit of my background. I was born and raised in Idaho. The town where I grew up was probably 95% LDS. So I mean, I just kind of grew up just kind of knowing about it my whole life. And I was raised in a church that wasn't super clear on the gospel. It didn't really talk about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so my brother and I both kind of went seeking into the Mormon church. When I was a senior in high school, my brother was a freshman in college. And he ended up joining the church. I ended up becoming a Christian. And so that's just kind of, and in my process of becoming a Christian, you know, I was this close to becoming a Mormon. I was ready to do it, and then I went to this retreat and heard the gospel for the first time and realized that it was all Jesus, and that the Mormon church talked about all the things you had to do beyond Jesus, and that's when I realized that what the Bible said was true. So I feel like God took me through that whole process of almost becoming a Mormon to understand Mormonism and understand how people can even believe all that crazy stuff of the whole pre-existence and all the stuff. And it's a very humanistic religion. It's very like, you know, you have to do it yourself. And kind of as humans, that's kind of how we are. We like, yeah, you have to follow the rules and work your way up and you know, start at the bottom and work your way up in a job or whatever. And so they kind of have that same concept with their salvation. So I've just done a lot of reading and I have a lot of friends. I've talked to them, a lot of, you know, just conversations. So I have a lot of kind of insight into their way of thinking and why, you know, what they're thinking and how they're, you know, what they're wanting to do. I'm not as great with the doctrine. The slideshow has a lot of that, and I can explain all that, but I don't have all the verses in my head and all the things, so I'll be using that to help. But I wanted to start with this, because this is kind of a picture of what Sandra was talking about as far as their way of salvation, and it's super complicated. And I was looking up stuff when I was I knew this picture was out there, and so I was looking for this particular picture. But I was seeing all kinds of stuff now with Pinterest and everything. For like little kids, they have like things to cut out, like for the Mormon church, like in their Sunday school, for kids to like put it together, this whole thing to like teach them about how they can, you know, earn their salvation. So this is what they call the first estate, and so this is what they believe. They were spirit children in heaven. God, you know, and his heaven, the heavenly mother, heavenly Father and heavenly mother, you know, had children. So they're all up there, and Jesus and Lucifer were also spirit children, just like we were. So we were all up there together. And then Jesus, they both kind of presented a plan of salvation. Lucifer wanted all of the glory. Jesus said that he would give God the glory, so God chose him, and Lucifer got mad, and there was a war in heaven, and God kicked out Lucifer with a third of the people, and they went to hell. And then the people who were valiant and fought with Jesus, they're the ones, when they get sent to the second estate, which is earth, they get to be born into a Mormon family because they were valiant. So they have the best chance to make it back to the celestial kingdom. Those of us who were kind of maybe on the fence, then we weren't as valiant in the pre-existence. And so we weren't born into Mormon families. It's harder for us to get there. Okay? Yes?
What happened before Joseph Smith to all of these celestial beings? Were they born?
Oh, yeah. So, okay.
Mormon?
Yeah, so that's where, right. So yes. So there's all these people who were born before the restoration of the true gospel, right? And so, so they are stuck in kind of a middle ground, and then they believe that they're given the opportunity to accept the gospel later, and that's where she was talking about. She mentioned baptism for the dead, And so that's actually something that's done in the temples. That's actually something that once children are 12, they're able to go to the temple and they do the baptisms for the dead. And they will take the kids and they'll be like, I baptize you for Joe Smith, dunk. I baptize you for Anne Margaret, dunk. I baptize you, and they'll do like 15 in a row where they'll dunk them, and then they'll go off, and then the next kid will come up, and they'll dunk them like 10 times, 15 times, and then go, and they just say the list of names. And so I don't know if you've heard that they're into genealogy. Yeah. And the reason that they're into genealogy is because they bring the names of the people from their family to the temple so they can be baptized for them, and then the parents will come back and do all the temple work for them, do the endowments and all that stuff, so that they can then be married, and then when there's the spirit prison, and then they're able to accept the gospel there, and then get married there, and then they can attain celestial kingdom. Let's stick that back in. Yeah. I feel like you can just keep kind of going and going and going, and there's like more and more and more that's crazy, crazy, crazy. So they come to earth in the second estate. So then they accept the Mormon faith. They're baptized, and then this says good works, chastity, tithing, word of wisdom. All the things they have to follow in order to make it into the celestial kingdom. And then there's 3 levels of the celestial kingdom. So if they were just baptized, they will make it to the lowest level of the celestial kingdom. So if they never went to the temple and did the temple work, which it has nothing to do with anything as far as like it's the Masonic temple ceremony. It's exactly the same thing as what the Masonic Lodge does. And it's very strange and odd, and a lot of Mormons actually come out being like, what just happened? I don't even know what's going on right now. So that's called the endowments. If you go through the temple and they call it taking out their endowments. So if you do that, then you can go to the second level. And then the ultimate goal of all Mormons is to be married in the temple and have an eternal marriage. So they believe that, we say until death do you part, they say for time and all eternity. And so they believe they're married forever. And so that's the ultimate goal of all Mormons, is to have a temple marriage. And then that gets you to the highest level of the celestial kingdom. And then if you're in the highest level of the celestial kingdom, then you continue to progress and can work up into becoming a god one day. And they don't know how long that takes. But you don't have a chance to do that unless you have the temple marriage.
So that presents a lot of problems, because there's some that just don't have an ability to get married.
Right, so...
And how many temples are there around the world right now?
Well, and they're building more and more because there's lots of reasons. And one of the things, so this is the thing. In order to be able to go to the temple, you have to pay a full tithe. You have to do what they call your callings in the church. So like, how we have people who work in the nursery and people who maybe do parking, or people who teach Sunday school, that kind of thing. They have that too, but they call it a calling. So the bishop, which is what my brother is kind of like the pastor of the church, but they don't really do any pastoring. They just kind of oversee the congregation. They will call people into their office and they'll say, I feel like God is calling you to teach the 4- and 5-year-old boys. And so that's their calling. And so then they are, kind of feel obligated to do that calling, because they want to get their temple recommended. So then every 2 years, they again go to their bishop, and they have an interview process that they have to answer a bunch of questions about how they've been living their life. And if the bishop deems them worthy, he'll give them a recommend to be able to go to the temple. And so one of those things is to pay a full tithe. So everybody's paying 10% of their income. They actually go to the bishop and take their W-2 in and say, here's my W-2, and here's my receipts for what I've paid to the church, and they reconcile them. And so that's part of, going to the temple. So the church has started to build temples all over the place, especially in Idaho and Utah. A ton have popped up beyond what there used to be, like maybe 2 in Idaho, and 2 or 3 in Utah. Now they're like every 30 miles there's a temple. Well, so they can encourage more people to go because they're more readily available for them to attend because they're close. Well, what do you have to do to be temple worthy? You have to pay a tithe. So that's more money to the
What
church.
makes the temple so special compared to, like, we've got churches on every corner here, so.
Right. So it's not like a church service. They go in and it's kind of like they are promising vows to God, saying basically I'll follow. I commit my life to the church, that kind of thing. That's really basically what it is. They're given passwords that they believe will be what they have to say when they reach heaven. There's a on the so here's another, and this is another interesting thing. There's this thing called the veil. They pass through the veil on the way to the second estate, and that's when they pass through the veil. Their eyes were veiled. They don't remember the first estate, right? So in the temple there is a veil. It's a very thin sheet. It's not like Solomon's temple veil that was like, thick. But there's a veil that they go to the veil, and somebody's on the other side playing God, and they say, what's the sign of the Melchizedek priesthood? And they do a handshake, and what's the sign of the Aaronic, or what? I don't know all the things, but they do handshakes, and then they say a password, and the password's long and complicated. So they have to keep going back to the temple to practice this password, because when they die, they have to do that and say that to get into heaven. And so as Christians, we know that the veil has been torn down, right? And they've put the veil right back up to where there's a separation between God and man. Yes.
Isn't there like where the husband knows his wife's
Yes.
unless he speaks her name?
That's right. So so when you go to the temple, you're given a new name, and the husband will know the wife's name, and the wife doesn't know the husband's name, because the husband has to call the wife up at the resurrection. He'll call his wife's new name, and she'll come up. And there's kind of a joke in the Mormon church. Well, I hope he remembers my name, because he might not, whatever. They say that. They're like, hope he remembers. So then every time you go back to the temple, you're given a new name, because you're not doing it for yourself anymore. You're doing it for your dead relatives or somebody else's dead relatives who have passed on. And I'm putting it in my will, no joke, do not baptize me for the dead, and do not do endowment ceremonies for me when I die, because I just don't want that to happen. Okay, so here's the broad. Oh, let me talk about apostasy. So apostasy, going to utter darkness. If you're Mormon and you turn away, so that would be like Sandra and her husband, they're apostates. So they have no chance. They're directly to outer darkness. That's basically the only hell that the Mormon church has. And the only people going there are people who were once Mormon and turned away. So the broad way, the good and the honorable, but blinded by the craftiness of men, that would be us. So, yes.
Just a quick question. So if you were one that was Mormon and you turn away from Mormonism, then there's no going back at some point?
You can go back. You can go back.
That would get you off that track.
Yeah, but then you probably, well, I don't know. And I don't know how you can come back, though. And they have a whole process of what you have to do to come back. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So the broad way that would be us, and that's the terrestrial kingdom, and that's the middle kingdom.
Hobbits.
Yeah. And then the bad people, dishonest, liars, sorcerers, adulterers, and whoremongers, they go to the celestial kingdom, and that's the lowest kingdom. But they say that even the celestial kingdom is more magnificent than we could even imagine. So, oh my gosh, I keep doing that. So that's kind of a general idea of their salvation.
I think that the magic kingdom is represented as a celestial.
Yeah, right. Well, this is the Salt Lake Temple. This is what the Salt Lake Temple looks like.
I think they modeled
Yeah,
it though after.
yeah. Yeah.
Disney was involved somewhere.
And then there's some, so you were talking about, isn't that sad? There's some people who will never get married. So my uncle was was Mormon, and he had 4 children, none of whom got married. One did get married, but did not get married in the temple. They've all kind of not followed Mormonism. They haven't totally turned away, but they don't go to church. They're not active. My uncle was really actually suffered a pretty great depression towards the end of his life because he realized his children, he and his wife were going to be here, but his children were only going to be able to be here. And, you know, for a Mormon, their whole goal in life is to be together as a family. Families are together forever. And, you know, he had to deal with the fact that his kids weren't going to be with him. And that's just, to me, it's heartbreaking to think about how the pain that some of the people feel because they have this skewed view of heaven and who God is and that kind of thing.
Is there a marriage for the dead, like a baptism of the dead?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. So they'll perform the marriage ceremonies. And a lot of times couples will go, and they call it temple work, where they'll go in and they'll do the endowment ceremony, and then they'll go in and do a wedding ceremony.
So they'll get dressed up like they're getting married.
Mhm,
They
yep.
get in there, but they're really pretending they're somebody else.
Correct. And a lot of them find it really like, they're like, oh, we went for my grandparents, you know, so it's like they were almost being like they were their grandparents, and to them it's just like so special and wonderful and, you know, it is, but yeah, in their mind, they're just like, it's so beautiful that they can do that, you know, and if you go to a service in their church, in their regular, like they call them ward houses, that's the kind of thing they talk about. They'll talk about how they had the opportunity to go and do the wedding ceremony for their grandparent. And you know, you need to be working toward getting your temple recommend so that you can go and do these things. And, you know, and they'll talk about dreams that they had about people that had died. And they were talking about how they wish somebody would do their endowments for them so that they could go to the celestial kingdom and stuff like that. And so that they don't talk about, you know, Jesus died on the cross for your sins and, you know, you want to, you know, I don't know, the Bible study and doing, you know, the things that we talk about with, you know, sharing evangelism and talking to other people and that kind of thing. It's all about their personal progress, they call it, doing things for themselves. So.
Do they have any, what's always gotten me is there's zero archaeological evidence.
Zero.
For what he claims happened.
None.
There's absolutely zero trace in Native American religion of anything like this.
Right.
Does that persuade any of them?
Some of them do, yeah. Some of them it does, yeah. It's just not talked about. Like, apologetics is not a thing in the Mormon church because they know if you go too deep, it's kind of, it all falls apart. And there's lots of skeletons in the Mormon closet, as far as with Joseph Smith and the history of the church. And a lot of it is out there now, and with the internet, there's a lot, they're kind of hemorrhaging with losing members, which is great, except for what happens is they're leaving the one true church, and if what they had was the one true church, then if it's not that, then it's nothing. So they just become atheists. And so that's where we try to, you know, we want to bring them to Jesus, not have them just throw it all away.
What is your relationship with your brother?
We have a good relationship. When he first joined the Mormon church, and I had just become I was a recent convert to Christianity, so I was like, you know, super gung-ho and like wanted to tell him all the stuff. And so I was constantly like, don't you know that the church believes this? And don't you know that the Bible says this? And it was just kind of like, you know, butting heads. And so I have learned that is not the way I'm going to reach my brother. So we have a really good relationship. We don't talk a lot about the differences. I really try to talk to him about my faith, my joy in knowing Jesus, because they don't have joy in like who Jesus, because like the parable said, they owe Jesus, you know, and really their concept of who Jesus is so different from ours. He's not their Lord and Savior. He's their older brother who paved the way for them to make it to heaven. So he's just kind of like this much better than them.
Do you ever feel competition from a work side? Because I worked in Salt Lake for a little while, and I was just stunned with the goodness that was around there, right? They modeled the Christian life as we would want it to be, better than we do in some ways.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, like, just around the Thanksgiving table,
Yeah.
it's like a little bit of a competition as to who, you know, how do you model to him, because
Yeah.
that's how he sees it, probably.
Right.
If you're really a Christian, you'd model it in your behavior and the output of your life.
Right, and
The
I
fruit of
do.
the Spirit, right?
I do try, and I try to do that as much as I can, and I find myself with my kids trying to help them to see how they can, show the joy they have in the Lord instead of, the things that you have to do. They're very legalistic with, the clothing that they wear and the, with modesty and that sort of thing. And of course we are too, but they're just to a little bit more extent. And I'm always kind of aware of that and try to make sure that we kind of follow the same lines that they would when we're with them, just so that that's not a stumbling block for them to say, oh, well, she's a Christian and they don't even, she lets her daughter wear spaghetti straps or whatever. That kind of thing is kind of,
Or drink caffeine.
and I do drink coffee, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, I'm drinking coffee.
My boss, Dr. Lamb, was invited by the Mormon church to speak one time, and he said it was funny because they asked him to do an extra talk, and he said, if I'm gonna do an extra, I need some caffeine, I'm dragging here. And so his handlers, the guys that drive you around, like, well, I can take you outside of town, and they drove him to a Starbucks, and they looked like they pulled up to a porn shop. These guys were like, not over there. He walked into Starbucks, got himself, a frappe or whatever, and came out, and he said it was the weirdest, and these guys literally looked like,
Yeah.
if I'm caught here, I'm dead.
Well, and what's interesting is the word of wisdom actually says, it says coffee, tea, and hot drink only. It doesn't say anything that it's caffeine. So my brother drinks Mountain Dew like it's going out of style. So
chilled coffee should have been fine. You got a
right, iced
frappuccino?
coffee, iced decaf coffee, right?
That's what yeah.
Yeah.
They wear special underwear, and
Yes.
there's a reason.
I was going to ask about that.
Okay, so when they go to the temple and get their endowments, they receive what they call temple garments. And so those are garments they're really just to remind them that they've taken their endowments and that they have, the promises that they've made in the temple. But they're really just kind of like a mesh, kind of a meshy material. They're a t-shirt that kind of, come here. For men, it's maybe a little bit longer, but women, it comes like kind of a cap sleeve, so they can kind of still wear a cap sleeve. And then they're kind of down, long, so it helps them stay modest with their shorts. They can't wear any shorts that it would be revealing
They're supposed
of
to
their.
frame 'em or something like that.
I've
Keep-
never heard
keep
of them being framed.
Like Mitt Romney has them in his hallway. There's something to do with eschatology, like be ready, because if the end comes, you need to grab your underwear.
Well, they're wearing them all the time.
But they don't have to. I thought they could, because Mitt doesn't wear them.
He doesn't?
And there's some exemption, like they were on display in the home, so it's a quick grab and go.
Well,
It's like,
as far as I know, they wear them all the time, except for when they're in the shower. And like they won't wear them; they'll go swimming, and they won't have them. But but they just are there to remind them of their covenants that they took in the temple.
So question from what Tom was asking earlier about, before Joseph Smith, what did we do for those? And we talk about how we can do the baptism for the dead and all that. But there's no way we're ever going to know the genealogy going back to Adam, right, for everybody on the planet. So there's a lot of doomed people that have no chance because their names are just lost forever.
Yeah.
Unless is there part of the ceremony where you could just be married to somebody that's dead, but you don't know their name, but you think they might have existed
interesting. I
4,000
don't
years
know.
ago.
I don't know. I might have to research that because that's an interesting question. I bet you there is.
It might be one of those reasons why they don't have a hell, except for people who apostate.
That's just sad. You think about
At least they're in something
billions
nice.
of people that never would have had a chance because they just didn't live in a time when their names weren't written on a piece of paper. So
Probably believe in some sort of hidden knowledge that would.
hidden knowledge.
So, okay.